When you think of a hero, what comes to mind? Probably someone from a big castle, right? Or a bustling city. But what if I told you about a hero who came from a tiny little cottage way, way up in the mountains? Well, that's the story we're diving into today, all about a boy from the Swiss Alps whose adventure would literally change his entire country. So let's get started.
So before we jump into a story, let's just think about that for a second. What really makes someone a hero? Is it just about being super strong or crazy smart? Or could it be something else? Like maybe it's just being brave enough to stand up for what you know is right, no matter what. Just hang on to that thought, because it's going to be super important as we get to know this guy, Ulric Zwingli.
All right, so every great story has to start somewhere, right? And this one starts in a pretty spectacular place. We're actually going way up high into the Swiss Alps to see how the very mountains and the air Zwingli breathed shaped who he was going to become. Seriously, just picture this for a second. Imagine you wake up every single morning and the first thing you see are these gigantic, incredible mountains all around you. That was pretty much Ulric Zwingli's backyard. He grew up surrounded by what people called natural grandeur, beauty, and awful sublimity. Now that sounds fancy, but it just means that all that amazing power and beauty out there, well, it gave him this huge sense of God's power and greatness, long before he ever picked up a book.
And it wasn't just the mountains shaping him. He had his grandmother, and she would sit with him and tell him these amazing stories right from the Bible. We're talking epic adventures about ancient heroes, shepherds seeing angels in the fields, and of course the story of Jesus. And let me tell you, these were not just your average bedtime stories. Nope, they absolutely lit a fire in his young heart and sparked a love for the Bible that would last his entire life.
Okay, so every hero's journey has that moment of danger, right? A real challenge. Well, as Zwingli got a little older and had to leave his mountain home for school, he was about to walk straight into a trap that he had no idea was coming.
So by the time he was 13, Zwingli was already so brilliant that he got into the best school in all of Switzerland in a city called Bern, and he was basically a rock star student, a great speaker, a great writer, even a musician. But here's the thing, being that talented actually made him a target.
See, back then, there were these two rival groups of monks in the city, the Dominicans and the Franciscans, and they were always competing to see who could be more popular. When they saw this super gifted kid, Zwingli, they both saw their secret weapon. One of the groups, the Dominicans, came up with a plan to use what they called deceit and flattery to get him to join their order, because they figured he'd bring them a ton of fame and money.
But luckily, word got back to Zwingli's dad about this sneaky plan. His dad knew that Zwingli was meant for something more, and his whole future was on the line. He didn't even think twice. He sent a message immediately. "Come home now." He literally pulled him out of there to save him from what he called an idle and worthless life. Wow, talk about a close call.
So, Zwingli was safe from the trap, but his real adventure was just kicking into high gear. In this next part of the story, he meets a wise teacher who's about to reveal a powerful secret, a truth that would change the course of his entire life.
A little later on, while he was studying in another city called Basel, Zwingli met this incredible teacher, a man named Wittenbach. Now, this guy was doing something really different for the time. He was actually studying the Bible in the original languages it was written in, Greek and Hebrew. And what he was discovering, well, for Zwingli, it was like seeing the first ray of sunlight after a long, dark night.
And this was the big secret Wittenbach shared. See, at the time, lots of people were being taught that you had to do all these special things, or even pay money to be forgiven by God. But Wittenbach said, no. The death of Christ is the only ransom. A ransom is like the payment to set someone free. This idea was revolutionary. It meant that forgiveness was already paid for. For Zwingli, this changed everything.
So this gave Zwingli a brand new mission. He decided that from now on, the Bible, and the Bible alone, would be his one and only guide, his infallible rule. He came to believe that you didn't need a bunch of complicated theories from other people to understand God. The Bible could actually explain itself. You just had to read it really, really carefully.
And this became his personal motto. He decided to put aside all the other philosophies and ideas he'd been taught and just go straight to the source. He wanted to understand God purely and simply, right from the pages of his own word. That was it.
So now Zwingli has this life-changing truth. But what do you do with a truth that powerful? You don't just keep it to yourself. It was time for our hero from the mountains to stand up and start fighting for what he now knew was true, even if it put him in a whole lot of danger. So here was the big clash, the two competing ideas. On one hand, you had the official church offering forgiveness, but it came with a price tag.
You could pay money or go on these long trips called pilgrimages to earn it. But on the other hand, you had the message Zwingli was now preaching. Forgiveness is a free gift. It was already bought and paid for by Jesus. Two totally different paths.
Zwingli took his first really big public stand at a famous church in a place called Einsiedeln. People were traveling from all over to see this statue they believed could perform miracles. There was even a sign over the gate that promised plenary remission of sins, which is just a fancy way of saying total forgiveness. But Zwingli got up and bravely told the crowds that God is everywhere, not just in that building, and that true forgiveness comes from Christ's sacrifice, not from visiting a statue.
Then things got even more intense. It was a real showdown. This monk named Samson rolled into town selling these official paper pardons. They were basically receipts for forgiveness that you could buy with cash. But Zwingli preached so powerfully against this that when Samson finally got to the big city of Zurich, the town council just sent him away. He left without making a single sale. What a huge win for Zwingli and the truth.
But right on the heels of that victory, something terrible happened. In the year 1519, a horrible plague, which people called the Great Death, swept across the entire country. This was a moment that brought everyone, including Zwingli, right to the edge of death, forcing them to decide what they really believed in. Zwingli got the plague, and he got so sick that nobody thought he would make it. But he did. He survived, and he came out of it with a faith that was absolutely unbreakable. So when his enemies in the church started plotting against him again, he was not afraid at all. I mean, just listen to this quote. He said he feared them as much as a giant cliff fears the waves crashing against it. That's some serious courage.
All right, we've arrived at the final, incredible part of Zwingli's story. Let's see how all of his courage, his study, and his bravery paid off in a huge way and completely transformed the most important city in all of Switzerland.
So how did it happen? Well, it was like a chain reaction. First, Zwingli gets invited to preach at the massive main church in Zurich. And instead of giving complicated sermons, he just opens up the Bible and starts explaining the life of Jesus chapter by chapter. And guess what? People absolutely loved it. Pretty soon, huge crowds, from powerful politicians to humble farmers, were packing the church to listen. Even the city leaders started defending him. The truth was spreading like wildfire and changing everything. And this right here, this was the result. Zwingli himself wrote about how much the city of Zurich had changed. He said all the arguing, the jealousy, the fighting, it was gone. It was replaced by peace and unity. For him, this was the ultimate proof that the message was true. It wasn't just words, it was making the city a better place. The boy from the Alps helped bring peace to an entire city.
So, Zwingli's story began with a little boy who loved the mountains and listened to his grandmother's stories, but it became the journey of a hero who found a powerful truth and was willing to risk everything for it. And that brings us right back to that question from the beginning, but maybe with a little twist. It's not just about what makes someone else a hero. The real question is, what truth are you brave enough to stand for?